Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Northeast Scene Podcast. This is Keith.
And Tommy.
How's everybody doing? We are here tonight with my friend and Syracuse legend, Grant Johnson.
Woo! Yay!
Boo. No, just kidding.
Grant, thank you so much for being on the show and bearing with us through the many, many technical difficulties we just worked through.
Yeah, that was just a half hour of trash. That sucked.
We're going to publish that on our Patreon, which we don't have.
Yeah, that's the outtakes. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. This is actually the very first podcast I have ever been on, which is probably true for a lot of your guests, but I don't really know. Maybe not.
We're very professional, and we only deal with the most seasoned people. So
yeah.
No, but thank you. Yeah, this is awesome. So we're the first. I feel special. I feel very special.
I feel special. We're all special, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So where are you right now? Like, what's your life like in the midst of this coronavirus thing?
So I'm physically, I am in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the attic of my girlfriend's sister's house, temporarily just out for a visit. Normally I reside in Syracuse, New York still, or again, depending on your view of time. Because I have left and come back a couple times, but I've been back for almost 10 years now. And, you know, I have a job. I work for a consulting firm that does a variety of different things, and I've been there for 8 years, and I'm still working. So I'm, my life, I still work a lot. I'm just doing it all at home. And that's what helps me get through the days. But then there's little, things like this that I get to do that break up the tedium of just waking up and being stuck in conference call hell all day. So
exactly, and it's the same thing for me. I work mostly from home, so I'm just working from home all the time now.
Yeah,
and just having this podcast and little projects and little things to do has kept me like totally sane through this whole thing. I have enough toys and stuff in my house to keep me occupied forever. So it's it's all good. It's all good to me.
I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome you're doing this. And I think it's a great, not distraction, but just sort of like a thing to focus on outside of work and distracting you from the horrors of everyday life these days. I think it's a positive all around.
So the consulting firm you work with, because you're always posting pictures of like historical Syracuse. Do you work like in some type of historical thing?
Well, I went to grad school.
Way to be super specific about it. You don't think
I know what you mean. So I went to grad school for historic preservation. And I basically, the firm I work for does all kinds of things. It's really difficult to distill, so I'll do my best to boil it down. But basically, it's a consulting firm that does like landscape architecture, urban planning, municipal engineering, civil engineering, and then permitting for a variety of projects, largely in New York, but in a lot of states actually we work in now. But like wind farms, solar farms, but basically, a lot of these projects require that you review potential impacts to things like historic buildings and archaeological sites. And so that's where I come in. And that was, I also have a bachelor's in anthropology. So I sort of like, focus on impacts to what are termed cultural resources from, either a road widening or, someone putting up 100 wind turbines in the middle of agricultural fields. It's one of those jobs that I didn't know existed until I did it.
Exactly. That's my exact career as well. When I try to explain to people what I do, they usually glaze over or ask me to stop. And I do.
You've told me several times what you do for a living, and I'm still not 100% sure I'm right.
Yeah. I'm going to sit down and break it down for you eventually, but not right now.
Yeah. I recently, my title is senior project manager, and I basically said to someone, I was like, that means I'm basically a secretary, an accountant, and like I forget what the third thing was, but it's just kind of like, it's a lot of, like I said, you're on calls, you're talking to clients, you're talking to other coworkers. It's this weird corporate limbo in a way. I mean, it's not a big company, but you know what I mean? Just sort of this very strange, almost Kafka-esque reality I find myself in.
Yeah,
but
and our job sounds similar actually because I do a lot of project management, and it's basically just wrangling kittens, as they say. Whatever needs to be done,
yeah,
getting the information.
yeah. But
So
I mean, it's a good job, and it keeps me busy, and ironically, as far as this podcast is concerned, keeps me away from the hardcore scene. But maybe that was going to happen anyway. Now that I'm 40, but anyway,
we're gonna get you back in. We're
Yeah.
gonna
all
we're
right.
gonna we're gonna ensconce you in hardcore.
I've
Is
been
this the
waiting.
part where I talk about teaching math for a half hour now? Can I do that?
No. And if that happens again, it will be promptly axed out of there.
Only if you do it in a like Matt Damon and Goodwill Hunting voice. That's the
Oh,
only
see,
way that it would be acceptable.
that's the worst part. I teach sixth grade math, so like I don't need any advanced mathematics. I have no clue how they work. Like I literally look at things like calculus, and I'm like, I don't know how to do any of that shit. Like
Yeah.
I know how to teach fractions and shit like that. I'm good with that stuff.
That's
Everything else,
that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Grant, I knew you growing up. We met on a particular message board.
Mhm.
We'll get into that later.
Mhm.
But just in the scene and bands you were in, we got to know each other. But I don't know a lot about you, like growing up. Like
Mhm.
what kind of kid were you growing up? Were you a popular jock? Were you
No, I was not a popular jock. I was not unpopular. I did, I tried different things as a lot of kids do. I played football for a couple years in middle school. And I'm, for those of you that might be listening to this that don't know me, I am an above average sized human being. I'm 6'3" and 200 pounds. And I've always been kind of a big kid. So, like, I was sort of encouraged by gym teachers and whatnot. You should play football. And it was not for me. And oddly enough, in this, this is really true. And I was thinking about this before this podcast, just music was just the thing that I latched onto as a kid, not necessarily playing it, but listening to it. And a part of that, I do credit my parents with kind of just being very encouraging of my sister and I, like, buying us tapes and like always like we listen to music in the car. I mean, there are like very specific albums I associate with my mom from like when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and so it was just this. Even though they were never like, oh, here's this Agnostic Front tape, but you know what I mean, like just that relationship to music was very strong from a young age. So it was just sort of like that was the kind of obsession that I've carried throughout my life with music. Kind of started as a young age, but as a kid, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I was probably a little weird, but it's really hard to say. Kids are weird, man.
Yeah. And I had that same experience. I didn't end up like sticking with any of my parents' music, but back when I was like 5 and my mom would play Bob Seger Night Moves
Mm,
in the car, that
yeah,
was the fucking jam, dude.
yeah, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, and some of the stuff like my dad. So my dad he was the kind of person that would listen to, and probably still does, listen to the same music over and over again. So maybe
Hmm.
not coincidentally, I've come to dislike a lot of the music that I was exposed to by my dad when I was a kid. But my parents have contributed in other ways to my musical growth, like become more interested in things over time. I've rated their record collection and found like, oh my God, you have this record. Like, oh my God, you have that. Like, starting with Jimi Hendrix and then Black Sabbath, and then like
Yeah.
weirder stuff like, the United States of America or Pink Floyd, like, and it was so, I guess the thread I'm following here is the importance of music from a young age, even into my life now.
Tell us about how you first got into hardcore and some of the initial bands who made an impression on you.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and it kind of dovetails with talking about my parents encouraging an interest in music. So my entrance into hardcore, I guess, kind of has like a couple. There's sort of a couple threads that came together. One has to do with heavy metal.
Hmm.
My cousins, I have a couple of older cousins who, I don't know, they must be in their, they have to be in their 50s now, but like they were, when I was a little kid, I automatically thought they were cool just because they were older, but they were into like Motley Crue, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest. They had the shirts, they had bandanas, they had posters, and I thought that was the coolest shit. So I actually stole my cousin's Motley Crue tape of the first album when I was like 6 years old or 7 years old or something like that. And
Hmm.
so, it's her fault. She indirectly corrupted me into the life I have now by, letting me steal her Motley Crue tape. But, just so sort of like, there's a kind of a tie between heavy metal and hardcore in a lot of ways. So I feel like it was sort of natural in that regard that I would eventually find that. But also, I got into bands through being into heavy metal and just through other things like soundtracks, like the Pump Up the Volume soundtrack. The Descendants are on that, and
Hmm.
what's another one I'm trying to think of? The Bad Brains. Bands that were just like they were around because they were on MTV, but you didn't really know what they were. And so, like, being into music and being into heavy metal when I was a kid, I read like these goofy magazines like Metal Edge and Circus, and then that led to reading Metal Maniacs, which actually, in retrospect, despite being something you could buy at like a supermarket, had articles about like that's how I first heard of Agnostic Front, for example,
Oh.
and got a tape of theirs when I was 13 years old. Before I ever went to a hardcore show, I was just like, "Oh, this band looks cool." Bought this tape, and what else? Neurosis, not really a hardcore band, but they're sort of like hardcore adjacent. So
Yeah.
there were these sort of like threads that kind of all were leading in this direction. And then my best friend, when I was like 11, 12, 13, he was sort of hanging out with this other group of dudes that were already going to hardcore shows. And it was a situation where basically he had asked if I could go a couple times. And I'm like, "Oh, Mom, can I go to this show?" And she's like,
Hmm.
"No, Mom, can I go to the show?" No. And then eventually she caved. And the very first hardcore show I ever went to was at the Lost Horizon in Syracuse,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
I assume you've been to. Um,
I don't know if I have. Didn't they before Hellfest? There was like Syracuse Fest, right?
Correct. Yep. And
Wasn't that where it was?
yes.
Okay.
So you've heard of it at least.
Yes.
It's sort of
Yes.
it still exists in some form, but it's not what it was back in the day, quote unquote.
Hmm.
But yeah, so basically it was in February of 1994, and the bands I saw, Chokehold, were the headliner. And then I think all three other bands, or at least two of them, were from Pennsylvania: Autumn,
Yes.
Side Over, and what was the other band? Sunburns. No, Sunburns Cold. Yeah, that's right. And just like that was it. Not to be like corny, like, oh man, I was hooked, but like seriously, like seeing. It's one thing to listen to like heavy music, guitar oriented music, but it's another to like see it in person. And it was really just like
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
this is what I'm doing now. And started going to shows like with that same friend. And then when he kind of like flaked out on me, I just kept going. Like I would have my mom drop me off, as like a 14, 15-year old at shows by myself, because I was just like, I want to go see Snapcase or whoever that was playing, just because it was like what I was into now. So that was kind of my introduction into the Syracuse scene.
Yeah. When I saw my first hardcore show live, like not just at I think the first show I went to it was before I really got into hardcore. But once I was into it and I saw it live, and I almost had my head taken off during a Dillinger Escape Plan set, I was hooked. I
Yep.
was hooked. That was it. That was what I did, and I still love it to this day. I think I played an Autumn reunion show in 2009
Oh
or
wow,
2010. Yeah, I think it was that. I got to go back and look. Yeah,
that's wild.
that's yeah, because when you said that, it just jogged my memory. At Kung Fu Necktie, where we were to see that
Hmm.
that Maserati show the one time.
Yeah,
Good,
I
good
didn't know.
venue.
Yeah, I didn't know Autumn had done a reunion. I mean, I guess every band has their kind of day in the sun.
Yeah, I have to go back and look to see if it's them. So don't quote me on that, folks. So you grew up going to shows in like the vegan straight edge Earth
Hmm.
Crisis heyday, right?
That's right.
Tell us about some of that. I'm curious about how it was and how the shows were.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this is something where I feel like I have an interesting perspective as someone who was very much on the periphery, and then became part of bands that were playing decently sized shows. And like I know the Earth Crisis guys now, and certainly didn't when I was 14 when I first saw them.
Hmm.
But I was like, I was kind of like a grunge kid, I guess, and then I just wore like, a flannel over an Alice in Chains shirt, like to my first show, and everyone was fully entrenched in the like baggy pants, bleach blonde hair, chokers thing. And, there may not have been sideways glances from people, but it certainly felt that way. So
Yeah.
like I already like, was kind of developing this sense of, I don't know, feeling alienated from the people around me because I was again, first went with like one friend and then no friends. And then eventually I found some other people in my high school to go to shows with, but they were also just kind of like, goofy guys that like liked some of the music, but not really. So we were just sort of like this group of weirdos that went to hardcore shows. But there was a lot of that in the 90s in Syracuse. I mean, shows were like a big deal. I mean, the first time I saw Earth Crisis was in July of '94. It was them, Snapcase, Chorus of Disapproval, Strife, and like three other bands. There were always these Sunday matinees with anywhere from like 4 to 6 bands.
Wow.
And they were, and some of them really weren't well attended because the bands honestly weren't that great.
Hmm.
But then shows like that, or the month before that, I saw Chokehold again with Bloodlet, Unbroken, and Undertow, which was like
Wow.
it
Wow, that's
was
amazing.
it was amazing. Yeah, I mean, and I knew Chokehold, I didn't know the other bands, but honestly, like Bloodlet blew my mind. Like they were so tight and so heavy.
I would have
Um,
loved to see Unbroken at the time. I just got into them recently. They're really good.
Oh yeah, they were great. I mean, and I came to appreciate them more later because that was my first time hearing them. But like
Yeah.
this was a time when like bands made a point to travel to Syracuse to play shows,
Nice.
and they definitely and so it was like people would come from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, like other parts of New York, Massachusetts. As a matter of fact, the guy who used to do Very Distribution,
Hmm.
John Dudek used to table. He brought, when it was just a distro with like a little paper catalog, he would come to
Wow.
Syracuse shows like every time there was one, and I bought stuff from him. I remember, so it was like these shows were like a rite of passage. They were like a big deal, and
Yeah.
so it was really interesting to be a part of at that time. And there was, because I didn't know anyone, there wasn't like this sort of like dramatic nonsense that you find yourself caught up in as you get to know people more and have to deal with other people's bullshit. But
Y-
I remember it very fondly, honestly.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was the first band you? Well, this is a two-part question. What was the
Hmm.
first band you were in, and what was your experience around that? And I always ask because when I was younger, I was like obsessed with the idea of being in a band, and I thought it was like everything that I had to do and the answer to all my problems. I remember driving around in my car and like practicing screaming and like
Hmm.
nudging all my friends. Like, I just wanted to be in a band more than anything. And when I did finally get into a band, it's kind of whatever. Like it's not this great mystifying experience that you imagine it to be. So what was the first band or bands you were in, and give us some experiences around that.
Yeah, I mean, so there's sort of a two-part answer to that. One is like, the ones that were just like me messing around with friends that never did anything, and then the first like what I would call quote unquote real band, right?
Hmm.
So in high school, some friends of mine and I just like as a joke, we're like, oh man, we should do this band and call it Bludgeon, but spelled blood gin. And we all had like this is like lunchroom nonsense we're talking about, and
Yeah.
we all had aliases. God, I don't remember what mine was, but they were all stupid. And but I pushed it into being a reality. I was like, guys, we should do this, we should like. And so we would get together and like we practiced once in my garage and then once in my friend's basement, but we didn't really have any songs. We just had like a riff that we kind of like I played a riff, and like my friend Jay, who played second guitar, who is now like he's like a professional musician and has like won a Grammy and stuff.
Wow.
But his roots are in. He was already an amazing guitar player at the time, but he would just like solo, and it was so stupid. But we like played in the foyer of our high school on like one of these field days where like nobody has class and they have like dunk tanks and things like that, but we just like
Yeah.
dragged all of our shit into the foyer and just played this like impromptu set of the like 2 songs, quote unquote, that we
Yeah.
played. So that was like the first not real band that I did, but I mean
Mm.
that was it helped prove that I could play in front of people and not burst into flames.
Right.
So when I went to Syracuse University for undergrad, and my friend Jim Heffernan, who also he played drums in Bludgeon, but he had been in bands all throughout high school, and he was later in Sparklightsthefriction with me, which is probably how we crossed paths, Keith, later on.
Yes. Yes.
But he was starting a band with a couple other people, and I basically invited myself to be in that band. Um, I was just like, "Oh, you only have one guitar player. Can I play some guitar?" And he was just like, "Yeah, sure." And so that band was called Set in Motion,
Hmm.
and we were around for a little over 2 years. We did like a demo. We were not great, but it was fun. We didn't know what we wanted to be. It was
Yeah.
sort of like it was like hardcore punk broadly construed. Like we covered the Dead Kennedys, but we also kind of like, I was listening to a lot of like really fast, like thrashy hardcore and like trying to bring that to the table, but everyone wasn't into it. So it was sort of, it was fun. And we managed to find ourselves. There was sort of this like Syracuse. This kind of dovetails with the previous discussion of like,
Hmm.
the Earth Crisis era of things. Earth Crisis Mach 1 before they first broke up. There was this very strong like whatever you want to call it, chuggy vegan straight edge hardcore scene. But then there was sort of like there was a punk scene with a certain group of bands that we sort of were peripheral to that, but there were like people that came out to shows, and these were shows that had nothing to do with the Earth Crisis scene again, which is like that's not a really like accurate way to put it, but for the purposes of this conversation, just think of it that way.
Yeah.
But it's they would cross over at weird times because of like who we knew. So like, this band Set in Motion, one of my favorite shows we played with Disembodied the first time they ever played Syracuse. And it was like, it was so awesome. They were awesome anyway. We probably weren't, but that's not important.
Your first time seeing them, were they? I remember my first time seeing them in like 1998, and it was just this ragtag group of like Midwestern new metal looking kids who took the stage, and I was like, what is this? And then they
Totally.
played, and I was like, oh my god! Like, were they as impactful even back then? The first time you saw them?
Totally. I mean, I was not familiar with them, but some of my friends were. And there's actually the photo that I posted on the message board that we're on is from that show. And it's just like you
Yes.
see 4 or 5 people just absolutely losing their mind. And it was like that. And it was because it was on a floor. It was a floor show. And I
Yeah.
was standing like right in front of them. And they're tuned to like drop A. So they're just like heavy as shit. And it was just
Yeah.
so it was super impactful the first time seeing them, and they became one of my favorite bands thereafter for that reason, because it was just like, what the fuck is this? Like I had never heard anything like that, or
Right.
seen it for that matter. So yeah, it's like by virtue of playing those kind of shows, I think I legitimized myself in some way so that I was able to find my way into other bands later with people that knew me as someone who attempted to play guitar.
How did you learn guitar? I would look up tabs. I didn't want to play guitar because I just thought it would be too hard, so I played bass. I'm like,
Mhm.
less strings, it's easier. But then someone just explained like EADGBE and told me how to read basic tablature, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh, so I would look up tabs online and just learn to play, and I kind of taught myself. And
Mhm.
I have a good ear. I can figure it out if I listen to it and play it long enough. How did you learn?
Yeah, so I again the best friend I mentioned who I started going to shows with, he had a bass that his dad had given him, and he's just like, well, I have this bass, and I was like, okay. And so for my 13th birthday, I got a guitar from my parents, and I certainly did not know how to play, but managed to retune the strings in a way that kind of made noise that sounded like something. So
Yeah.
um, it started with that, and then I took lessons for a year, and then was just like, well, I don't want to learn fucking blues. I still don't want to learn blues. I've been playing guitar for 27 years. It's just not. I
That
don't.
was the worst part about trying to take lessons, like legit lessons. They would bring out like the Mel Bay book and like
Yeah.
you would learn like these blues scales. And I'm like, I don't want to fucking do this.
Yeah,
Like,
make sure is this in Lydian? Is this Lydian? Fuck you, dude. I fuck with,
Yeah,
bro, I don't want to play any of this garbage.
Yeah, that has never been something I have been interested in. So like, after about a year of lessons, I was like, you know what, I'm good. And I was probably 15 at the time, and just basically just played and played and played and learned. I think I learned a lot. I'm like you, Keith, in that like I think that's when I developed my ability to hear things and like listen to things. And that was has sort of been very useful to me over time, because I've played with a lot of different people, and a lot of people just can't, they can't hear something and like figure out how to play it. But like that's, I taught myself songs by like Snapcase, Screeching Weasel, Black Train Jack.
Right.
They were very easy songs, but I was just like, that's how I learned how to play these different things. And then based on that, I would write my own songs or riffs. And then like also seeing bands, that's an important way to learn how to play too, because you watch people and then you say like, oh, that's how they make that noise. And like, 2 years later, you figure out that that's called an octave chord, or or a whatever the fuck, like a triad or something, I don't know, or a tritone, or just whatever, but you figure out how to make these shapes with your hand that make certain noises. So in a lot of ways, I guess I'm self-taught, but I've learned a lot from the people I've played with, especially people that were trained musicians in some way, and they like, would show me something and they would say something like, oh, it's the fifth. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. The fifth fret?
Yeah,
What?
yeah, exactly. Or like, oh, it's a pinch harmonic. I'm like, I don't know what that is. Oh, that thing, the squealy thing. Yeah, yeah, I know what that is. So, you learn that way, but a lot of it definitely was like self-taught and just like perseverance.
Playing with people better than you really helps you too.
Oh, totally.
It like forces you to learn and play better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I met you when you were in Spark Lights the Friction and touring. Tell us how that band came together.
Yeah, so Set in Motion, my first band, ended in the beginning of 1999, and then I played with a couple other bands in the first half of that year. And then two of the guys that were in that band, again, my friend Jim, and then Emmett Menke, who later drummed for Polar Bear Club, None More Black, and some other bands. He and Jim and I and our friend John, I don't remember the real genesis of how we got together, but basically we just started practicing, and it just sort of, John had a couple songs, and based on that, I was like, oh, okay, I like what we're doing here. And we just sort of like, our first few practices were in my parents' basement, and then we're like, this isn't going to work out. We need to like be able to play somewhere more regularly. And so we got a practice space. I think we played our first show in like September of 1999 with One Line Drawing, which is Jonah from Far, but it was just, just him just starting.
The solo thing, right?
Yeah, him and R2D2, and this band Sunday's Best, who were on Crank Records and maybe one other local. But we were doing something that at the time there wasn't anything like that going on in Syracuse, really.
Right, and I noticed that.
Yeah.
When I went and listened to the record again, I was like, this would be like a lot bigger now, because there wasn't a lot of like post-hardcore type stuff going on like that at the time.
No, we were definitely like we were ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, and I don't mean that as like a puffing myself up or puffing up that band, but I would agree with that there were definitely bands doing stuff that was similar to that were influenced by like the same things we were: Quicksand, Hum, Far, whatever. But we our contemporaries, we didn't have a lot at the time. It was kind of like the bands we were friends with, like This Day Forward, who you've interviewed a couple members of. I mean, we just like bands that we like played with a couple times, and we're like, oh, you guys are like cool people and fun to hang out with too. So like, you're our buddies now. And so like, for being a band that was kind of more melodic and rock based, we ended up, hanging out with, bands that were heavier, and, we just, I don't know. We were weird in a lot of ways, probably because we were also from a scene that was not known for kind of like more melodic rock. So people just automatically assumed we were heavier or something. I don't really know.
Yeah, it was you would either had to be straight like a straight emo band or heavier or like you're a heavier band that's going in the more rock direction. Those were like the only things.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
the scene was more homogenous back then too. Like different styles would be on the same show together a lot more. Way more it would happen a lot more then than it did now, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we played, oh God, we played with every kind of band under the sun, in the time that we were around, which really wasn't that long. It was less than 3 years. But again, being from Syracuse, and like our singer bass player was also briefly in One King Down. So we had this
Right.
connection to that. And then, we ended up on Trustkill, and we were sort of a black sheep on that label. So people it was weird, man. Like bands used to, I have these vivid recollections of like, we would play with bands, and they basically would like come up to us and be like, "Hey man, you wanna like take us on tour?" I'm just like, who do you think we are? Like, we're nobody. Like, like, just because we're on this label, like, it was
Yeah.
so strange. And I do not mean that as like, oh, we were this big deal, because we weren't. But it was just like there's a strange, cachet of being on Trustkill Records. That, I mean, that label was at one point in time a big deal.
Yeah.
So, but we were like a fish out of water so many times. And I mean, not to prattle on and on, but like our last tour that we did, at Sparklights of Friction did, was, I think it was Josh Truskill basically, said to Poison the Well, like, "Hey, can you please take these guys out? Like, they can't catch a break." We did have terrible luck as a band, which we can talk
Mhm.
about or not.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that.
Okay, good. But so it was with Poison the Well, who were friends of ours. I mean, we had already played like a dozen shows with them before we went on tour, and like, great guys. Like, we got along with
Yeah.
them super well. Loved playing with them. And so they headlined, and then Unearth and Sworn Enemy and us. And what the like, that bill makes no sense. And like, we, nobody already knew who we were, but nobody gave a fuck about us. Like, I always tell people this story. We played a sold out show at the House of Blues at Disneyland in California. And
Whoa.
the House of Blues had this policy where they took 10% of your merch sales at the end of
Wow.
the night. Yeah, and Poison the Well sold so much that they refused to pay them. And they were just basically like, "Okay, well, then you're not getting paid your guarantee." And they were like, "Fine, fuck you." Um, but us, we sold $60 worth of merch.
Oh.
And the guy was like, "Haha, no, really." And like, our roadie was like, "No, really," and like turned around and showed them our tally with like whatever it was, like, a couple shirts and a couple CDs. And they were like, "Oh, okay, that's fine. You're fine." Just like that was that tour in a nutshell. Just like, we had no business being there. It was mostly fun. But that's kind of the situations we found ourselves in for whatever reason during the tenure of that band. So we were sort of, we didn't know how to make that lateral move into the world of, I don't know what, like, we ended up becoming friends with Thursday, but it's like, we couldn't kind of, capitalize in the way that they did, even though, they had definitely had like a bit more appeal than I think that we did. And
Yeah, because they had that hardcore appeal with like sing-alongs, and I guess
Mhm,
people would even mosh too. But I
totally.
think a lot of post-hardcore bands had a hard time. Like I don't even remember Rival Schools being like huge. Rival Schools opened for Thursday, and
Yeah.
I remember someone specifically telling me like people weren't really watching them, which just seems insane to me because it's Rival Schools. I mean, that first record is classic.
You know what though? You can only go so far, on, like, one or two members. It's like you
Yeah,
always think of Rival Schools as like, "Oh, this is Walter's new band."
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
But it's
Exactly.
like, yeah, but that never, it wasn't quicksand, and some people can't get over that. And
yeah.
so it's like, and I also think of, Superchunk is one of my favorite bands ever.
Hmm.
And they toured with the Get Up Kids, opening for the Get Up Kids at one point, and they posted this photo online of like people up front in the front row just flipping them off because they wanted them to get the fuck off the stage so they could see the Get Up Kids. Like some people just don't care. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't even want to consider new sounds. Like there's just a certain kind of music fan that like they like what they like and they're not interested in anything else. So I don't know. Yeah.
So is there any other bad luck stories you want to share about the band?
I went back to, I looked on Spotify. Our full length on Trustkill like is unlistenable to me. I hate the recording. We didn't know what we didn't know. We're all like 20, 21, 22 when we did that band, and just like we recorded that the Trustkill full length at Inner Ear, like or Fugazi and like all these other Discord bands and whoever else is recorded, and it's like an amazing studio. And that recording sounds terrible because we didn't know what we were doing. And the guy who recorded it, who cut us a sweet deal to let us record there, he was just like a total like laissez-faire engineer, like throw a mic in front of a guitar and like, okay, great, let's go. So I don't like our recordings. I think that made a difference in how we fared in the world. In terms of every tour that we did was a fucking disaster in one way or another. The first one, this is a good story. The first tour we ever did was supposed to be a month long with the August Prophecy, which was Keith Allen, aka Keith in Hell, his band. And we had played some shows with them, but again, a radically different band than we were. So they booked a tour. Their drummer quit or was kicked out. Keith canceled the entire tour, never told us. Then they got a new drummer and tried to rebook the tour. Meanwhile, we had already started said tour, not realizing that maybe half of the shows of a month-long tour had been canceled.
Oh my
God.
God.
So we played Binghamton, we played Wilkes-Barre. They were touring in an airport bus that broke down. They had to go back to Syracuse. So we're like, well, we'll continue the tour. And it was just like, I think immediately after that, we had something like 7 days off before we had another show. And then, it was basically that for a month, like play a show, have 2 days off. And in the middle of that, it's actually funny listening to the episode, the interview with Vadim. We also had a tire fly off of our van on tour in Florida, which is so crazy. Like that was an amazing incident to say the least. But scary, but also just like I remember getting out of the van and looking at the axle and just bursting out laughing just because it was so absurd. And it was just like, well, what else can go wrong now? But it was just like we lost a ton of money. We played, I don't know, like 12 shows in 30 days or something. It was. But I look back upon it and it was still a lot of fun because it was like the first tour I ever did. And but every tour we had after that was like that. It was either like some catastrophic van failure, shows falling through, or both. The last tour with Poison the Well was probably the most successful, quote unquote. But we also we missed 3 shows, I think, because we broke down in New Mexico and just we just couldn't catch a break. And that was kind of the theme of that band, but it was still, fun. We had a lot of fun.
So we know there's a long list of bands who had problems with Trustkill, the label. And did you experience anything weird or no?
I want to be diplomatic. Not really. There were some things that at the time I didn't think much of. In retrospect now, I'm like, that's weird. No like dirty laundry to air, and certainly nothing dramatic to the level of some of these other bands that have posted these crazy stories and interviews or whatever online. I mean, I kind of, my only regret about that time is I feel like, I was pretty good friends with Josh, and I think because of the dissolving of our band, our friendship kind of suffered. And I haven't seen him or talked to him in years. And when I have seen him, it's been totally fine. So it's like there's no beef. I have no beef with him whatsoever. And like whatever happened with that band, I mean, we broke up 17 years ago, like a long time ago. So like,
Yeah.
it's I don't know. I mean, I think the one thing I will say is that like he had, I think, higher expectations for a group of like 21-year-olds to know what they were doing in terms of advocating for themselves, in terms of like getting tours and like you know making money or
Yeah.
whatever, when like we had no fucking idea what we were doing, and like we weren't Poison the Well, we weren't 18 Visions, we were a weird band on his label. So it's like I don't know
Yeah.
what we could have done to make things better for him. I was grateful that he
So
gave us the opportunity, but it was just weird.
yeah, you probably didn't have people beating down the door necessarily, like maybe 18 Visions or Poison the Well did with tour offers and stuff. You probably had to do a lot of legwork yourselves.
Totally. And that was one of the things. It was a sticking point in the band, because I did a lot of the booking for us, and I just kind of would like run things by people like, hey, do you guys want to play a show on Long Island? Do you want to play a show in wherever, Milton, Pennsylvania? And we would go play, and a lot of the shows were not great, and or they were with like metalcore bands because we were on Trustkill, and then a couple people in the band were like, well, I don't want to play these shows anymore. I'm like, okay, fine, then you book us shows. And then of course they didn't. So it was just like a situation where that a lot of bands find themselves in, where there's like one person who pulls a lot of the weight in terms of like booking and
Yeah.
business, and other people don't put in the effort and then complain about it. But towards the end, like some of the other guys were trying to find us like other shows and tours and reaching out to bands, but again, we just like we didn't realize that like, oh, we should probably like hire a booking agent,
Yeah.
Well,
that things that would have made a huge difference.
one of the things that keeps coming up to me, and I keep thinking about it, is like you have you have a lot of education. Like, how did you balance school and being in a touring band at the same time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like when Sparklights of Friction first started, it was at the tail end of three of us being at Syracuse University. So basically, like we were trying, as we got out of school, we're like, all right, well, we should try and do something. And so that's like the few tours that we did were sort of post undergrad.
Okay.
Yeah, but we were still, when we were in school, we were like doing weekends and like on breaks, we did like a week long winter tour, or maybe it was 2 weeks, I don't remember. But either way, it was basically then that happened. I didn't go to grad school for another until I was almost 30, actually.
Okay.
I took a long break. So that was how I swung that, basically.
How did the band end? Did the label say, all right, one record, that's it, and then the band broke up, or did the band break up before any of that? How did it go
No,
down?
it did not. Basically, I think if you asked each of us, you would get a slightly different answer. But basically, like, we were not having a lot of luck getting good shows, and our drummer in particular wanted, he just wanted to be playing, and I'm trying to be diplomatic about this again. It's nothing against him at all, but I think just, he wanted to be out on the road, and we couldn't make that happen. And so there were some kind of like tough internal discussions, and we just basically decided like, okay, we shouldn't do this anymore. Which was dumb. We totally could have gotten a new drummer. Later on, someone in my next band after that, The Funeral, which started while I was still doing Sparklights of Friction, was like, dude, I wish you guys had asked me to play with you. And I was like, yeah, why didn't we do that? I don't know. I think it's one
Yeah.
of those things where just like the four of us, John, Jim, Emmett, and myself, like that was Sparklights of Friction. Adding someone else to that wouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
So, we basically just decided to pack it in, and I can't remember if we already had a couple shows booked with Thursday, and just basically it was like Thursday, Most Precious Blood, and Midtown. And we were just like, or no, not Midtown, The Movie Life, sorry.
Yeah.
Um, and we were just like, okay, these are our last two shows. So that was how that ended. And our last show in Syracuse, our first last show, I should say, it was great. It was very just like like, oh, it was a good note to go out on. There were a lot of people there, and a lot of people there for us. They weren't just there to see Thursday, so it was it
Yeah.
was nice. And then I definitely felt kind of adrift after that band. It was a big part of my life, like both emotionally and time wise, and blah blah blah. So I was pretty sad, but the funeral kept me going and was a great band to be in. And then one of our friends in Syracuse was diagnosed with brain cancer and later passed away. His name was Sean Liu, but there was a big benefit show for him in 2003. And so Sparklights of Friction got asked to play that, and we were like, well, of course, yeah, of course we'll do
Hmm.
this. So we played that, and that was, I guess, our reunion / actual last show. But it was kind of bittersweet because our drummer had a medical issue that has since been resolved, and he actually couldn't. He only played like 4 songs, I think, before he had to stop. So we were just like,
Oh,
it was a brief set, but you know, again, I remember the good things and the bad things, but overall it was a positive experience, and I'm glad I got to everything from the wheel flying off to a racist tow truck driver picking us up in Virginia to weird like itinerant homeless guys like knocking on our motel door in New Mexico at 2 in the morning. Just like all these weird little experiences you have on tour. Like I'm very thankful I got to have all of them because of that band.
yeah. You can, and when you're older, you can look back on all of it fondly and be like, at least I got to do all that stuff,
Totally,
good and bad.
totally.
And folks, check out the full length. The tracks are floating around on YouTube because is it pronounced La Home Robotnik?
L'homme robotique, which is like not French for robotic man. But I'll tell you this: I don't know why it's not on Spotify. Trustkill as a label doesn't really exist anymore. It's owned by some arm of Sony, but Josh
Yeah.
is not involved in it anymore. I don't know why our album is not up on Spotify, but I have 2 boxes of Sparklights of Friction L'homme robotique. I can't even pronounce it myself. L'homme robotique CDs. And if anyone wants one, email grantjohnson@gmail.com, and I will send you one free of charge, along with some
Look at
stickers,
that.
because I
There you
still
go.
have a shitload of CDs and a shitload of stickers, and I don't need them. So,
Hit them up. And Snake Charmer has always been my favorite on that record. Ever since
mm,
the first time I heard it, it just always stuck with me. Like that breakdown riff at the end, I just always remembered it for some reason. It's a good
yeah,
track.
that's a fun song to play. Yeah, I'm glad
Yeah.
you like that. That actually, funny story. So that song ended up, Josh managed to get us on some sort of weird Hot Topic sampler.
Yeah.
And it was also on, Matt Hoffman had like a BMX show or something on ESPN2, and I guess it was played on that, but I never heard it. So like, that it got out there. He did do some stuff to help us. We just couldn't pick up traction on our own for whatever reason. So,
Yeah. So the funeral was your next band.
mhm.
Let's
And
talk about that.
yeah, so one of the tours that Sparklights of Friction did was with another Syracuse band called Darker Day Tomorrow. Guys that were in Another Victim and other Syracuse bands, but they were heavier, kind of trying to do like a Damnation thing. Good band. And they sort of were coming to an end, and the drummer, it's actually very funny. The drummer basically recruited everyone in the band by telling them that he wanted to do a band like something they were interested in playing. So he called me up and was just like, man, I want to do a band that's like the Swarm, and like I can't remember what else he said, and I was like, oh fuck yeah, like I'm totally on board for that. But he told the other guys like something else
Yeah.
differently. um, so 4 of us, 3 guys from Dark Day Tomorrow and myself, got together and started writing songs, and it was like we clicked instantly. We just like wrote 6 songs really fast, and then like, oh shit, we need a singer. And then John from Sparklights of Friction and One King Down, he was our singer for one show, but then was just kind of like, nah, this isn't my thing. And
Yeah.
so then Ryan, who does Hanging Like a Hex, he did the zine and then the label that still exists now, Hex Records.
Hmm.
He tried out for us and just was like, oh, why haven't you sung for a band? Like, what the fuck? He was just like this, a natural. And, that was that. And that band, we were around for, again, almost 3 years, not quite, but like, I've never been in a band that practiced as much as that band. We practiced like 3 times a week, which I know is not a lot for some bands, but like most bands I've been in have practiced like once a week,
Yeah.
maybe, or once a month.
Yeah.
So it was like, that helped because like I feel like we were really tight and like, we went off live and like we wrote, a lot of songs in that time. And it was like, it was a really fun, just like fast, heavy, hardcore, at a time when no one was doing that in Syracuse really. We got out in the Northeast, played a lot of good shows, we caused some, local drama. So it was,
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Can we tell
oh
that story?
boy, which one?
The getting. Can we tell the getting thrown off of Hellfest story?
I will tell a version of it.
All right. I'm ready.
I won't, I'll leave dirty laundry in the past. But there was a dispute, let's say. So this was Hellfest. Shit, what year was that?
2002, I think.
Yeah, you're right. It was 2002. So we were asked to play. That was the year where it was a group of 5 people were promoting the show, and it was huge. It was at the fairgrounds, outdoors. There were tons of bands. It was fun. There was a personal disagreement, shall we say, between one of the promoters and the other guitarist in the funeral that culminated in an incident of physical violence. And I won't name names or what the act was, but it was like, it didn't need to happen. In retrospect, it was, it was dumb,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
whatever. And it happened with all the other promoters around while they were being interviewed by a reporter. So it was just
No.
yeah,
That's a bad scene. That's a bad scene.
So it was this really tense moment, and like, the offending band member stormed off and left, and I was left standing there with these guys like, so okay.
Yeah. What do we do?
Yeah, and long story short, we got kicked off the show, and we ended up playing a free show the night I think it was the night we were supposed to play that Saturday. We played like a midnight free show, which was awesome, in our bass player's basement.
Mhm.
We covered Agnostic Front and Black Flag, and like, there were probably like 50 people there or something. And, a lot of the other bands that played that we were friends with disagreed with us getting kicked off the show. So like a couple of them wore funeral shirts on stage, and, much to the consternation of the promoters. And, I went to the show and had a lot of fun, moshing to The Promise and Cro-Mags and whatever else. And it was like, it was dumb. It was dumb, honestly. It was just,
It didn't have to happen, but it did.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that's not a juicy retelling of it, but it's just kind of like, it was 2002. So that was almost 18 years ago. It's like,
Right.
sleeping.
I like to dig up dirt and present it to the people.
So this came up. So the funeral, while we're promoting things, the funeral double LP discography is available now on Hex Records, and on Spotify. And it's great. It came out awesome. But there's so one of our friends, Chuck, interviewed all the band members, and someone, I think it was him, maybe tried to ask about that incident, and I basically like squashed it. I was like, you know what? I don't want to talk about that. Like, I don't want this band to be remembered because of some nonsense like that. It's just kind of like, I don't know. At the time, it felt it made us feel like outlaws. Like, yeah, we get kicked off Hellfest. Like, who cares? Like, really, who cares? And in retrospect, yeah, it was not necessary. So
did you have trouble getting booked after that, like in that area?
Nope, not at all.
Okay.
We definitely did not play shows for that promoter, but I think if anything, it emboldened us to book ourselves a lot more. So like, that fall, we played a Halloween show that like 200 people came to. I think that was the show where we covered Damnation AD. And I think a clip of that is on YouTube. If anyone is, in front of their computers right now, it's worth watching. But no, it didn't hurt us at all in the end. If anything, some people, I think, respected us more because, they just, I don't know. We just didn't take shit from people. That's one of the things I liked about that band. We're just like, oh, you're gonna try and fucking do us dirty? Nope. No, you're not. Fuck you. So
I love that. I love that. At some point, you moved to California. I don't
Mhm.
know why or when exactly.
I don't know
Tell
why
me
either.
why.
No. It was the very beginning of 2004. My ex my ex and I basically just decided that we wanted a change of scenery
Hmm.
because Syracuse is cold and snowy, and we were just
Right.
sort of like, we know what this is all about. So we kind of randomly moved to Cypress, California, which is just east of Long Beach. It's in Orange County. It is a sort of nowhere place, but it was, I was there for 2.5 years. My ex and I did not last long. She left after a year and I stayed.
Hmm.
But we're good friends now. In fact, she plays bass and sings in the band I'm in now, which is called Difficult. But
Yes, folks, check out Difficult. Grant, is it on Spotify?
yes, our first album, To Heal, is on Spotify, and we are in the process of mastering our second album right now, which is called Tea with the Times, and will also be on Spotify someday.
Yeah, and
Um,
I did listen to I think there's a first LP, right?
yeah, that's To Heal. Yeah,
That's what I listened to. It's very good. Check it out,
thank you.
folks, but continue.
Yes, so she and I moved out there. Wasn't for her. She left after a year. I stuck around another year and a half, and I, I was just kind of like hanging out. I made a bunch of friends there who are still friends of mine. And I was in 3 bands at one point in time. Knife Fight. We released a 12-inch on Lengua Armada Records, which was the singer of Limpress record label. So I'm probably the only person that's done a record on that label and Trustkill.
Hmm.
Um, but and I was in a band called Dirty Girls that recorded a 7-inch after I left, and then another band that had no name but practiced a bunch. But I was just kind of like replicating my life in Syracuse, but working a not great job and not making enough money to sustain myself in California. And my
Hmm.
living situation was going to change, where my roommate was moving out, and I was just kind of like, what am I doing here, like with my
Yeah,
life? And so, not knowing what else to do and not having the strength to tough it out, I moved back to Syracuse in 2006. So, my time there was relatively brief, a couple of years, but it was like, I remember it, um, you know, I, as just like, it was such an important experience to actually like, move away from home and like see what I could do. So, it was a good experience from that perspective.
that's good. You gotta try, And the moving to California thing was a thing. Like, yeah,
Totally.
when my first band ended, I was like, oh, if the band doesn't work out, I'm gonna move to California and just check it out. I went on a vacation to LA and I loved it.
Hmm.
But it's what they say, like, good place to visit, not a great place to live. I agree with. Personally, I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to live there because I don't want to exist in my car, and I love the Northeast. I mean, this is the Northeast scene. You can't beat it. So
And I would agree with that. I mean, I recognize that phenomenon of people moving to California. That's definitely, I don't know if it's still a thing. It certainly was then.
yeah,
And like we did the same thing. Like we basically took a vacation in like Long Beach and LA, and we're like, oh, this is great. But life is not hanging out. So
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
that's so there's like everything else in between, and you're kind of just exactly what you said. It's like, oh, I want to go see a show in Hollywood. It could take 30 minutes or it could take 3 hours to get there. Like, and you have no way to predict it.
Yeah, I was in Irvine
Mhm.
in 2015, and or 2016, somewhere around there, and I Google Maps, and the venue's like 3 miles away.
Yep.
And I'm like, cool, this will take like 20 minutes to drive there at the most. And it was like an hour and a half
Yep.
to the observatory. And I was like,
Yeah.
fuck this. Like, how do people do this?
They just, it's so interesting to me. Like, there's definitely like East Coast type people and West Coast type people. I'm
Yeah,
definitely an East Coast person, and the friend
same.
the friends that I made in California had that same personality, just like direct, kind of, I wouldn't say curmudgeonly, but like, a little bit cynical and realistic, and not like sunbaked and weird and
Y-
passive
y-
aggressive, which is like a very no beef with my West Coast friends, but or anyone I knew out there, but there was definitely like there are types of people is what I'm getting at here.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that Northeast edge. Like it's a sarcastic, because
Yep.
I would have coworkers on the West Coast, and they'd be like, "Oh, you're very East Coast," and I'd be like, "Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you." Yes, I am.
The job I worked before I left California, I worked in a music distribution warehouse kind of business called SmartPunk,
Yeah,
which doesn't exist anymore. And it was affiliated with Fearless Records. But like one of our accounts, like I was a merch buyer, and we started a relationship with Hurley, the like surfwear, skatewear, whatever the
Oh,
fuck they are.
yeah.
And so like I got to go to the Hurley like warehouse to like meet our sales rep and meet all these people. And I swear to God, it was like everyone there was in some sort of like movie about stereotypical Californians, just like, hey man, like, like
Oh,
hang
no.
loose. And I'm just like, this is so fucking weird. But they let me raid their store. Like, yeah, whatever you want. And I was just like, I don't want to wear your logo, but okay. So it was, yeah, it's a weird place. I agree. Fun to visit. I would live there if I had a job that paid me enough to live there, because it is very expensive to live in California.
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So, Grant, clarify something for the audience once and for all.
Mhm.
Are you vegan?
Not now, never have been.
Okay. Have you ever been vegetarian?
Yes, for 22 years this month, actually.
That, folks, that's an inside joke from our secret message board that we're not allowed to talk about. Sorry for that.
You know what's really funny though?
We're not allowed to talk about that?
Yeah, the first rule of the message board is that you don't talk about the message board. So I'm violating the rule right now.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if that came from like the message board person. I was like, wait a minute, I don't think he's
No.
All right.
No, you know what's funny though is like that's not the only place that's a joke. For some strange reason, I must like exude vegan, because I have friends in Syracuse who like are like, wait, are you vegan? Or they just know I'm not and make a joke out of it. And like, I'm vegan adjacent, but I've never fully dove into that lifestyle. I won't call it a diet because it's not, it's a whole thing, man.
Yeah.
So, but I'm also not, I'm 40 years old. I'm not in the mode of where I feel like I need to constrain myself with labels like that. Like, for example, I still do not partake of spirits or drugs or cigarettes, but I also don't go around being like, I'm straight edge, because that's not.
You don't need to label it. Yeah. And now I wanted to ask you about that. You've never done any of those things for your entire life.
Not never. I've never smoked a cigarette, and I've never been high. I have had alcohol, but I have never been drunk.
Okay.
So these are important distinctions.
When did you have alcohol? Was it just one time? Or?
No, a few times when I was younger. So I grew up in a family, both immediate and extended, of alcoholics. So I had, sips of beer when I was very young, and then like white wine spritzers at my grandparents' anniversary, and champagne on New Year's Day. But like it never appealed to me. Like I was just like, okay, this tastes interesting.
Yeah.
But I didn't.
So you've never been tempted like, hey, I should try getting drunk, or I should try this.
I will confess that there was an incident where I was tempted, but I think it was just out of like depression and desperation. I was just like, well, maybe I should start drinking, and I like started to drink a beer. This was in my 20s, and I was just like, this does not feel right. Like I don't want this.
Yeah.
And I just, and no, I don't feel that temptation. Like I totally get it. I get why people drink. Life is fucking hard, man. And you need an outlet. And some people, and I probably don't have enough outlets, which is why I've just like, have a lot of rage sometimes. You can only eat so many things, and I don't know, spend so much money. And that's why people, they drink, and, it helps them bond with their friends and, have a good time, or think they're having a good time or whatever. And I get it.
It's a shortcut to comfort, a shortcut to connecting with people. And that's why I got heavily into it, because I was always fascinated by people who who just never did that, and envious at points, because I'm like, oh, that's just one thing they don't have to worry about. And that I had my struggles, but now just not having to deal with that on a day-to-day basis now is very liberating.
No, that's a good way of putting it, dude. Because you don't have to, just like the not having to plan your day around X, Y, and Z is just like unbelievable. Like the freedom you feel of like, I'm not hungover, or I don't feel like I have to go do this, and this. And it's like, it's such a nice way to go. Like, it's a nice way to start the day. Like, you feel like positive, like waking up. You're like, oh, I usually feel like shit. This is great.
Yeah, just not feeling like shit and depressed all the time is new to me. It's great. I actually look forward to getting up in the morning. I look forward to the day, not to getting up. Let me clarify that.
That's fair. Well, but also just like the mindset that it can put people in, like, oh, I can only have a good time, or I can only do thing X when I'm drinking. And the flip side of that for me is like, I feel like I have involuntarily opted out of many social situations because I don't drink, and people just like don't invite me to hang out. But it's like, man, I will fucking party all of you drunkards under the table. Like, I'll stay up all night. I don't give a shit.
Wow.
But maybe not now. I'm a little tired. But
see, I won't go to a drinking party. I'm not someone who can be around that and like party, quote unquote. Like, being around too much drinking or extracurricular activity makes me uncomfortable. There's only certain situations I'll hang out in.
Yeah, I'm overselling my interest in being around that now. Certainly when I was younger though, and like a lot of my friends, again, to tie this to California, were like hard drinking, hard partying. I definitely had to literally drag people to their front door on a couple occasions. And I actually left my friend in his backyard because I couldn't get in his house. I'm like, well, it's not going to He'll be all right.
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
And he called me the next morning and was like, what happened? And I said, I couldn't get in your front door. He's like, oh, you just press the garage door. I'm like, what the fuck do I know? Anyway.
If you were coherent enough to tell me that, we would have not had this issue.
He was literally punching me, saying, fuck you, over and over again. I was just like, you gave me no options. I also missed seeing High on Fire because another one of my friends got so obliterated that I had to take him home instead of going to see High on Fire.
Keith, bummer. Don't start that. Yeah, I was that guy on a weekly basis.
Well, we've also had several times where we've gone to see bands and been like, what the fuck are we leaving for? Why do we have to leave? And then you look at the one person we're with and we're like, God damn it. All right, he's got to go. All right, he's got to go.
He's got to go see a guy about a thing, or he's in a state. Grant, I remember when your band played was it the last show in 2011? What band was that in New York City?
Oh, that was Night Owls. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I remember coming to that gig and I was sick. Like, I had a cold, so I was taking Dayquil and sneezing, and I was supposed to go out and party in New York City after the show, and thankfully, like, my people didn't get back to me. So I purposefully took the last train home so that I would get stuck in Trenton and not end up going back to Philly and like getting obliterated. So I sat in the Trenton train station from like 2 a.m. until the first SEPTA train ran at like 6 a.m. And my phone was dead, so I just had to sit there for like 5 hours.
In Trenton?
And at the train station. But I set it up that way so I wouldn't end up back in Philly just getting effed up again. So that's where I was at that time. It was fun.
I did not. That's an interesting coda to that evening. Yeah.
Yeah. I had no idea. Well, the show was good, at least.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was fun. And that band actually became difficult, basically. Three of the same people. Do you have any other burning Syracuse questions? I mean, I've been a part of the scene, man, for 26 years. So
I have one that has absolutely nothing to do with hardcore.
Okay, let's get into it.
All right. So I grew up playing lacrosse, and one of the things that I know about upstate New York, specifically Syracuse, and you're a big guy, was that ever pushed on you? Was, hey, go play lacrosse because you're big?
So you know what? This is interesting. My family moved to Syracuse, outside of Syracuse, in 1990. I lived in Illinois before that, and I had never heard of lacrosse before we got to Manlius, where I grew up and went to high school. So like, it was a total mystery to me. And I like, one of my neighbors had a lacrosse stick, and like we tried to like throw the ball back and forth. I'm like, what the fuck? This sucks. But the high school I went to was like a serious lacrosse high
Yeah.
school. So they had no need for someone like me that was like just learning what the game was at age 11. So I never got into it, but it was definitely like, SU was, and I think still is, a pretty big lacrosse school.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and like lacrosse is deeply embedded in like local high school sports. So, yeah, it was something that I kind of like became aware of and was like, no, I'll do football instead.
Gotcha.
I'll suck at something else.
Well, Grant, thank you so much for being on the show. And folks, check out Difficult
Mhm.
on Spotify. That's Grant's current band. Check out the Funeral discography. That's out there
Double
on
LP,
Hex
right?
Records.
Yeah, Hex Records. That's right. Yep, plenty of copies left, I'm sure.
The first Sparklights of Friction EP is on Spotify, and that LP is floating around on YouTube. But as Grant mentioned, email him and he will send you one of the remaining copies if you're interested. And you should be,
free of
because why
charge.
not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. Again, I can't be objective about it because I was involved in it, but you can't beat free.
That's right. Well, Grant, thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much.
Okay, so everybody, we're here now with Mr. Michael Hart. Now, I worked with Mike at the Oxford Valley Movie Theater way back in the day. Like, what was that, Mike? 1999?
Yeah, I started in November 99.
Okay, so Mike emailed me with a very, very awesome story today, so I wanted to get him on to tell it. So, Mike, take it away.
Yeah, so like I said, in November of 1999, I started working at the Oxford Valley Movie Theater. And, after being there for a few hours, Rich Arnold came up to me and he was like, "So what kind of music are you into?" And I told him that Nirvana was my favorite band and I liked the Deftones. I was adamant that I didn't like Korn or Limp Bizkit because this was, 1999.
Yeah.
And he was like, you gotta listen to hardcore. And then at a certain point, I guess Mike Shaw came over and they both were like, you have to check out the Dillinger Escape Plan. And I was like, okay, well, like, what record should I get? And then between the two of them, a debate sort of ensued between under the Running Board and Calculating Infinity.
Yeah.
And they sort of went back and forth for like a good 10 minutes. And I just stood there, like, not knowing what they were talking about at all.
It's funny because, like, Tommy, I don't know if you were like this, but I was a real cultist about hardcore. Like, I felt like it was my job to convert everybody or get them to listen to the music. And I mean, a lot of people were like that. Did you do that at all?
No, I didn't give a fuck. I didn't care. I didn't really like. My thing was like I always kind of was into like a bunch of different types of music anyway. Hardcore was part of it, but like I always liked, like, I was a big death metal person as it was, so like I didn't give a shit.
Yeah. So Mike, continue.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely had like a few friends who would give me CDs and be like, check this band out. I would, listen to the CD for a while and eventually give it back to them and be like, thanks for giving me this. Like, I love this band. And then by the time I gave it back to them, they were like, yeah, this band, like, they suck. Don't listen to them. Listen to this. So there was definitely some of that going on.
It was weird. I remember being at a show at Melody Bar with my friend. He didn't listen to hardcore at all, but I brought him to a show and we bought these CDs and, we're like, this one sucks. Oh, that sucks. And my friend is like, you guys buy these CDs and then you say they suck. Like, what is the deal with this? I guess we were just like super critical. I don't know. I don't know what we were doing.
So I bought a copy of Calculating Infinity and I played it and I remember like I hated it. I was like, there's no verse, there's no chorus, like there's certainly no melody, like, and I hated it, but I just played it and played it again and eventually I couldn't stop playing it. And then it just sort of grew on me. Yeah, I mean, it really, changed things for me musically.
That's a difficult album, like, for your entrance into hardcore too.
Yeah, I think maybe a few months later, I was in a friend's car and they were playing Opposite of December, and I had no idea who Poison the Well was, but like that was like a real holy shit moment. Like when you have this idea of like a band in your head that like you haven't heard, but you wish there was a band that like did these things. And
Yeah.
Opposite of December was like, I mean, if you told me right now, like you could only have 3 albums to listen to for the rest of your life, Opposite of December would definitely be like on that list, like no questions asked. It was just like this is exactly what I've been like searching for.
I had the same experience with Cave-In because I couldn't take like all the screaming and hardcore at first. And
Right.
then there was a Cave-In song programmed behind where they have like a singing part, and I was like, oh, that's it. That's it. So I had like a similar experience there. But tell us about when you went to the last Dillinger show.
Yeah, so years go by, and A Life Once Lost had broken up, and I remember I had seen Dillinger at on their final tour at the Union Transfer in Philly, and I just sort of thought that was it. And then when they announced that they were going to do one final show in New York, I was like, I got to get tickets. I have to. There's no way I can't. Like, this is the band I've seen most out of every other band. I've probably seen them, 20 times. I can't not go to this. So me and my wife were sitting at both of our computers just smashing, refresh, trying to make sure that I got tickets. And I ended up with 2 tickets. And the night of the show, I was working late, and it was January, I think, so it was freezing. And I'm sitting at my desk, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm 35 years old. I don't know if I really have, I don't know if I have it in me to drive all the way to New York City by myself, endure like the final Dillinger show, and then drive all the way home from New York at 1:00 in the morning or whatever it was.
Yeah.
You guys saw the picture I sent you. So Dillinger shows were like the one show where like I sort of didn't give a fuck like what happened. Like I was getting to the front, and
Yeah.
and like if I got hurt or something, like I just didn't care. Like at A Life Once Lost shows, I was always sort of a little like somebody might die here, but at Dillinger shows, I just didn't care. I was like, whatever happens, happens, and that was sort of part of like the magic of Dillinger Live. But so anyway, I'm really on the fence as to whether or not I'm going to go. And the tickets on StubHub were going for like insane amounts of money. And I just happened to be scrolling through Facebook, and I had friended Bob Meadows at some point years before. And he happened to have posted, does anybody have an extra Dillinger ticket? And so I messaged him and I said, I have an extra ticket. How are you planning to get there? And he said, well, I'm probably going to drive. And so I messaged him back and I said, look, I have an extra ticket. If you pick, I live in Princeton and you live in Ben Salem, so I'm on the way to New York. If you'll give me a ride, I'll give you the ticket. You don't even have to pay me. And so that's what he did. He came to my house, picked me up, and I got to spend an hour with him in the car on the way to the show and an hour back. And I got to ask him all kinds of questions about, what it was like to be in a pretty successful, metal band and tour with all these other bands that, I listened to, as a kid. And, then we got to, go to the very last Dillinger show. So it was a pretty cool experience, and have it all come full circle to, like you find out about all this music from the original bass player of the band to, 20 years later, you're in the car with the singer, like going to the last ever Dillinger show.
It's a lot of amazing coincidences. And, I wanted to get you right on to tell this story because it's just so strange that, I got into this music the same way, like meeting Mike Shaw at the movie theater and Pat McCormick and them taking me to shows and me getting hooked on the music and just being taken on this wild journey. And, the music, like our scene and all the bands that came from it are just incredible. And like that music shaped my life, really.
Yeah.
It gave me all my best friends. It took me places I never thought I'd go. It gave me the ideals that I have, and I'm just incredibly grateful for it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, especially for me, was just like a wild just set of circumstances. I remember like when I quit the movie theater, I wasn't there for very long, and I got a job at Walmart, and a couple months later, Rich Arnold got a job at Funkoland, which was like right next to that Walmart. And I would go in there on my break and just sort of talk to him. And when I went in there one time, he was like, "Hey, I have I have RCD, and he gave me a copy of, Open Your Mouth for the Speechless. And I put it in my car and I started to drive home, and it was so, different from anything I had heard that I made a U-turn, and I went right back to the store, and I was like, Rich, this is like the most incredible thing I've ever heard. And he was, pretty humble about it and pretty good about it. And I guess a couple months later, he gave me a copy of Fourth Plague, and that's when I was like, oh shit, these guys are writing real songs. And
yeah, big leaps forward on each of those early albums for sure.
Yeah, and then when I saw, I was at one of the last This Day Forward shows at Palenque Park, and I think that was the first time I saw A Life Once Lost actually play live. Rich wasn't in the band at that point, but like that's when they were starting to play stuff from, a great artist, and then that's when you were like, oh, like okay, like this is a different level of songwriting for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you so much for coming on and sharing this story with us. It was awesome. And folks, these are the kind of stories we're looking for. So whatever you got, give it to us. Email us at northeastscene@gmail.com. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
So there you have it. There's Mr. Michael Hart. That was a great story. I was like, we got to get him right on to tell that one.
Yeah, dude. And the fact that it involved all those same people, that like it's so funny that the movie theater was this kind of like mecca of that. Like, it's so strange, man. I just like,
it's because Mike worked there. I'm telling you, Mike was like, what's the word I'm looking for? The focal point for all this stuff. The movie theater, the Shaw House, like everything went through there.
He was magnetic.
So we've gotten a lot of feedback from people listening to the podcast, and guess what, Tommy? We have been heard in 11 countries.
Holy shit!
Can you believe that?
Not really.
There are people in other countries listening to this.
I barely listen to this. And I'm on the
sometimes I listen to it when I put it up, but there was one episode I had to re-edit the whole thing twice, and I was like, I'm done. I don't want to hear it again. So sometimes I listen to it and sometimes I don't. But thank you everyone who's listening. More people are listening than we imagined at this point, and there's like more flyers. It's almost to the point where I can't keep up with them, but please keep sending stuff. I'm cycling through it and posting stuff. I like to space out the bands and the people who submit. There's a system to all this madness. So please keep sending us stuff to northeastscene@gmail.com, or hit me up through the Instagram too. But a couple emails we got. One from Cody Clark. He says, my name's Cody and I sing in a band called Gloves Off currently on Upstate Records. Love your podcast, especially since I grew up going to Palenque Park, First Unitarian Church, Cafe Metropolis, etc. And I've remained friends with all the dudes I met growing up there. So check out Cody's band, Gloves Off. Justin Sheridan says, thank you for making this podcast. I've lived in the Bensalem area my whole life, and it's nice to hear stories about the scene around here. My first local show was Lamb of God, All Is Held Alol at Palenque. It was absolutely insane. I was getting more into hardcore at that time, and all of my friends were metalheads. I remember them trying to start a push pit at this show, and someone kicked them in the head, so they stopped.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that show. I remember shit like that happening at a Lamb of God show.
Yeah, dude.
And Justin also says, I was wondering if you could shed some light on the venue in Bensalem called the Cell Block. I've never heard of it until recently when I came across videos of Immolation, Incantation, Gorephobia playing there, and a Killer Godspeed set there from the 90s. I've never heard of that venue. Have you, Tommy?
Cell Block? No, I've never heard of that.
If anyone has stories from that venue or knows about it, email us and we'll talk about it. And then Matt Canning says, hey, fellas, just wanted to reach out to say it's awesome that you're doing this. Just finished the first episode, and it's great and oddly relaxing to listen to. Now, I love that because that's what I imagine for this. I don't listen to hardly any podcasts, but I mostly listen to them when I travel. I travel a lot for my job, or I did at least. But I like having a podcast where it's like a community or like people talking. It's like having friends with you on the road, and that's what I imagine for this one. So I thank you, Matt, for writing that. That's exactly what we're going for.
And Matt's one of those dudes that. All right, so how do I explain? So Matt was in Shai Hulud, but Matt was also like one of the smartest people at my high school. So
Really?
Matt has written several books. I know he wrote one on memory called Never Forget Again. And he's one of these people that like he fucking like picks something and goes fucking full bore with it. Like for real.
So if he likes this podcast, it has to be good.
It's phenomenal then, because he's just one of these people that like he's super driven. He's really, really smart. And on top of that, he apparently has phenomenal fucking taste in podcasts. So
thank you, Matt. His name sounded familiar. I think he used to post on Centrifuge. Which I used to also post.
So he was in a band called Dark Day Dawning. He was the guitar player from Dark Day Dawning. And the bass player from Dark Day Dawning was
Jim, who did Centrifuge, right?
Centrifuge, and they were all kids I went to LaSalle with.
So we also got some reviews on iTunes. Freddie Diaz says, I'm 15 minutes into my first episode after finding this randomly, and I'm already hooked.
Nice.
So fun to listen to. Thank you, Freddie.
Hey.
Andrew Bowman says, such a great concept. Love the deep dive on the Northeast hardcore scene. Being from New York, I look forward to much more. The All Else Failed episode is incredible. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. We agree. That's a good one. Listen to it if you have not listened to it yet. Brendan Ekstrom says, great show. Nice. Thank you, Brendan. Oh, and here's a review. They said, the best podcast, the best hardcore related podcast that is around today, and quite possibly the best podcast of all time. 5 stars, would listen again. You know who wrote that?
Keith.
Yeah, I wrote our first review. So. Oh man.
So something really funny I was just going to bring up, and I think this is great, and it's because it's all because...
Wait, is it going to be a short story?
Yeah, no, it's all...
Make it short.
It's only about... It's because of the page, we were able to find the original audience of one tape. A person on Instagram, her name is, I think, Valerie. She sent it. It looks pristine. Like it's phenomenal. So I have it on order right now. It's coming from Amazon. I have a cassette player to MP3 converter. So as soon as it gets here, I promise we'll have that audio up on the site so we can put it there.
We'll put it up on the YouTube page.
We can all make fun of it.
We can all make fun of it. I will give out Tommy's cell phone number, and we can call and harass him about it.
Don't do that.
Okay, we won't do that. But listen, everybody, thank you so much for getting in touch with us. Continue to write us emails at northeastscene@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, post Instagram stories. We want to grow this thing. Get in touch with us. Give us 5 stars and comments on your podcast medium of choice.
Yeah.
As I always say, a little bit goes a long way.
Yeah, because the more you share it, the more people are like, you come out of the woodwork with, hey, I have a bunch of flyers, or hey, I have these old records, or hey, I have this. And it's like, that's the stuff that we really, really, really want to kind of like archive and get together and talk about. And I think some of the things that makes this really like a fun adventure and stuff that we're really excited about doing is that you never literally know what's going to happen. Like there's times where I open my phone in the morning and I look at her and it's like, there's 11 new messages on the Instagram. And it's like, shit, one of those could be something fucking awesome. Like, or 11 of them could be something fucking awesome. You never know.
There's always cool surprises, like the conversation we just had with Mike. And we just really love doing this thing.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun, and we want to continue doing it and continue growing it. And, you guys are part of it too. So thanks everybody for listening, and until next time.